I'd like to start off by conducting a quick informal survey. How many of you in this room, with a show of hands, have seen the movie Top Gun? Awesome. That's more than I expected. So for those of you that haven't, Top Gun is an 80s flick that stars Tom Cruise, and he plays this hotshot fighter pilot named Maverick who gets his shot to go to an elite pilot training school called Top Gun. This movie came out when I was a little kid, and I was hooked. I wanted to be just like Maverick. And after the events of September 11th, I really felt a calling to serve in the military, and I knew that I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. So after college, I joined the Air Force. I packed up all my bags and I moved to Texas so that I could attend the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program. Now, this was a real honor because NJEP was a very selective pilot training school. And just to give you a little bit of context, only about 10% of all cadets in the nation are selected to go to pilot training. So that's about 1,000 people. And only 10% of that pool are invited to come to NJET. And on the first day I show up, I meet all my classmates. We get together, we go to our flight room, and the first person we meet is Alec. Now, Alec was in the class ahead of us, and he was just a really great guy. He was an incredible pilot. He always knew when to crack a good joke, and he had a very cool Australian accent. Alec was like our fat group leader if we were a bunch of MBA ones. Actually, more appropriately, he was like our older brother. He really showed us the ropes. He taught us how to study. He told us which instructors were cool and which ones to watch out for. He partied with us. But most importantly, Alec prepared us for our very first flight. And what a flight that was, let me tell you. I still remember sitting on the runway with my instructor in a real live military jet aeroplane. Tower comes over the radio and says, "Slider 2-1, clear for takeoff." The instructor pushes up the throttles towards max. The engine starts spooling up slowly around us and then roar to life. It shakes the entire plane. The plane is like this animal that wants to be released from the cage. And finally, we release the brakes and we shoot down the pavement at 150 miles an hour. 2,000 pounds of thrust hit me right in the chest and shoot me into the back of my seat. And then it's as if a gentle hand comes from underneath the airplane and lifts us up into the sky and off into the air. What a day that was. We chased clouds, we danced in the sky, we did loops, we did rolls, and I didn't even throw up, which is a huge accomplishment, let me tell you. Then halfway through the flight, my instructor turns to me and says, "Now it's your turn to fly." And he hands me the stick. I put my hands on the controls for the very first time, and in that moment, and from that moment on, I would soon learn that I was a terrible pilot. I had trouble landing the airplane, which apparently is a skill you need to have as a pilot. I sounded horrible on the radios. I would forget what to say, when to say it, and I just sounded like an idiot. And over time, that and other problems manifested themselves into a confidence issue. I would get nervous at the controls. I'd compound my mistakes and dwell on them. I soon developed a reputation as a struggler, which is a polite way of saying that I probably wasn't going to get my choice of assignment, but more seriously, I probably wasn't going to graduate. And then one day, I was flying back with another instructor after a training mission, and we get to the traffic pattern, and Tower tells us that we're not clear to land. And as I'm listening on the radios, I can hear that there's 10 other planes in the traffic pattern as well, and they haven't been cleared to land either. And then Tower comes over and says, "Runway operations have been suspended." This is pretty unusual. So as I circle back around the airfield and come over the runway, I look out the side of my aircraft into the field next to the pavement, and I see this giant black hole in the ground, where before there was just grass. Minutes later, we're cleared to land. I go back, I take off all my gear, I walk into our flight room, and one of my classmates comes up and says, "Hey, Monty, did you hear about what happened while you were out there? A plane went down, crashed, both pilots are dead." "Holy shit, you're kidding me. Do we know who it was?" "Yeah, dude, it was Alec." I still remember sitting in the auditorium with all the other pilots, all the students, all the instructors, as we were going over the accident investigation brief, which is the moments leading up to the crash. And during that briefing, they typically play the audio from the cockpit voice recorder, which is commonly known as the black box. And there I was, listening to Alec's voice in his final moments as he realizes he's about to die. And then there's silence. Now, Alec and his instructors, they were good pilots. And I was a terrible pilot. So if a mistake like that can happen to Alec, yeah, it'll probably happen to me too. And I won't lie, I was afraid to fly after that, so much so that I decided I was going to quit. I was struggling. I wasn't a good pilot. Alec's death was traumatic for everybody. I don't think anybody really would blame me. So as I started going over the process of how I was going to go about quitting, I naturally asked myself the question, okay, well, what are we going to do next? And the truth is that I didn't really have an answer for that. See, the thing is, I had been waiting my whole life for this moment, that there wasn't really anything else I wanted to do. And it wasn't really a question of what would I do, but rather who would I be? And it was in that moment that I realized that I can't quit. So, in order to move forward, I first had to accept the fact that death was going to be a risk I would take every single time I started into an airplane. Every single time. But I would mitigate that risk by first honing and perfecting my basic skills, which would then help build my experience, which would then help build my confidence. So I took a paper mock-up of my plane's cockpit and I hung it in my living room, and I would just sit in front of it for hours and hours, visualizing my maneuvers, visualizing my landings, telling myself this is where my eyes need to be, these are where my hands need to be at certain points during the flight. I rehearsed my radio calls in my head over and over again until they were like second nature inside the airplane. And I taught myself to compartmentalize my mistakes while I was flying so that I could adapt and move on and not dwell on them. And over time, I did build my confidence up. And I became a better pilot, so much so that I went from the bottom of my class to the top of my class with my choice of assignment. That year in pilot training, it taught me a lot. It taught me about confidence. It taught me about facing and living with my fears. But really what it taught me was that great reward comes from great risk. And for me, that reward came on June the 12th, 2009, when in an auditorium full of my friends, my family, and my peers, my squadron commander handed me my silver wings and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Second Lieutenant Christopher Monti, pilot, United States Air Force."